Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. Oh, my goodness. I have never been so glad to see the weekend. That full moon sent me for a full speed circle. So I am sure a bunch of you had this similar week and are looking forward to the weekend just as much as I am. I'm watching because Meredith should be rolling out here in just a minute. She was back in my office and a staff member went to go let her out. So I could go ahead and get started. I'm going to wait for a few people to hop on. Hi, Christine. We are going to get started here in just a minute. Meredith should be running to me, hopefully. She doesn't like to stay back in the office very long. Hey, baby girl, without me. So she says, hi, Ronnie. I know it. I left you. But I wanted to come on and talk about RAW. And this seems to, I was asking my staff some questions that they seem to be answering more commonly these days. So we could maybe cover a topic that everybody's asking about and make sure we can answer as many questions as possible. And one of my staff members says she's seen an uptick in questions about raw feeding. And I'm sure it is due, in fact, to the part that everybody is starting to learn more about raw feeding. And so we want to talk a little bit more about that. And then in the comments after we get done, I'm going to share a link to a webinar that I recently attended that is available for you to view. And it is so cool. I will say I attend a lot of education seminars and try to keep up on a lot of different nutritional things. And this webinar was put on by Answers, and it was with Dr. Judy Morgan, who is a holistic vet that specializes in Chinese medicine for pets. And one of the things that she discussed, which I just found completely fascinating, was using raw food as medicine for your pets. And so paying attention to the proteins that you feed and what their temperature is. So each protein has a warming, a neutral, or a cooling effect on the body. So if you have an inflamed pet that maybe is having some issues with inflammation in joints or inflammation in the urinary tract, any kind of inflammation, you don't want to feed a warming protein because that could be adding to the inflammation in the body. So recommending more of a cooling protein or even a neutral protein, and also talks about the rotation of proteins and how important that is as well. So I will share that webinar in the comments below once we end the webinar. So you guys can check out that webinar. It is so cool. I will tell you, I was on my way to the beach and I was fascinated. I was riveted for an entire hour. And really enjoyed watching that webinar, and I hope you guys will as well. Feel free to ask any questions as we go along. I have some of the examples of ways that you can introduce raw. I will tell you my experience first is that I got started feeding my pets raw after my first dachshund, Samantha, was diagnosed with kidney failure. I attended, again, an educational seminar put on by someone at Answers, and I learned all about goat's milk and the different benefits of feeding goat's milk, and that led me into a raw diet. So my dogs have eaten an exclusive raw diet for 5 years. Merida has only ever known raw at our house. She says she loves raw food, and she gets goat's milk and Answers raw every day, twice a day, as do my other animals, my other dachshunds, and we add in other things. So sometimes I will take home some of these things like the edible elixirs by Primal, which are really cool. This one is the Omega Muscle edible elixir, and that has a lot of stuff in there for joint health. Sometimes I'll take home the squash puree for digestive support, not because there's any particular reason, but just to give my pets a more well-rounded diet. So I will take some of these other things home and add it to their regular routine meal, just to give them something different, give them a little extra here and there. We rotate our own diets as humans. We don't eat the same thing every meal. And I think it's important to do the same thing with your pet. There are different amino acids and different nutritional value in each food that we feed our pets and feed to ourselves. So you definitely want to make sure you're rotating. Gone are the days where we would say, well, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Keep feeding the same thing if you're seeing good results. That unfortunately leads to things like protein sensitivities and upset stomachs over time, and not a very well-rounded diet. And so we recommend here, if you're feeding a kibble, you want to rotate between proteins if you can. If you have a very sensitive dog that has a sensitive belly, you want to rotate slowly, but you definitely should still rotate those proteins. And then we recommend, if you're feeding something like a From Gold or a blended protein food, Canidae is another good example of that. Yes, Kimberly, you should rotate your dog even if they have a sensitive stomach. You just need to do it more slowly. Or what you can do is pick a good base kibble and add in a fresh whole diet on top of that, so you can give them some examples of doing that would be like adding a canned food. If you wanted to add a canned food and you can rotate the canned food that you add into that component, you can add in a couple spoonfuls of a canned food and rotate between the different canned foods that you add in, but keep the kibble base the same. The other thing you can do is add in some of these elixirs. That's a really good use of these elixirs. Or you could add in some raw food on top of the kibble. Another really good way to add in some fresh whole foods without going entirely into raw diets. Now, one of the things that can keep people from feeding entirely raw diets is the expense. And I will say it's not cheap. I have 8 dogs, and we go through 30 pounds of raw food in about 14 days. So that tells you it's really not cheap to feed raw diets. Thank goodness I work at a pet store and have the access to it. So it does help me a little bit. But you can still add in those fresh, whole, raw components by not feeding 100% raw. So don't let it scare you and make you think you have to dive in whole hog or nothing at all. You can feed both together. There are some myths out there about feeding raw and kibble together, but I tell you, those have been debunked. Don't pay attention to those. There was kind of this argument that you shouldn't feed them together because they're digested at different rates. And that is true. It does take about 8 hours for kibble to digest in a pet's body, and it takes about half that amount of time for a raw diet. But don't let that scare you. It doesn't matter. The things that we eat as humans digest at different rates, and that doesn't stop us from having a varied amount of items on our plate at dinner time. So that doesn't mess with the pet's digestion. And the one good thing about a raw diet, as I was saying, is it is digested in about half the time. So if you have an elderly pet, it does put less stress on the more vital organs, and that's a good thing. So you definitely want to look into it if you have a pet that's having issues. The raw diet can really help. Ashley asks, what if you're trying to incorporate raw foods and your dog is picky? It can happen. It can definitely happen. And dogs are picky. One thing you can do with raw is if you're trying to introduce it to a pet that is picky and not particularly fond of raw at first, you can sear the raw on the outside, put it in a frying pan for a second and just sear on the outside, like you would maybe a piece of raw tuna, and see if that helps. Sometimes the warmth will help attract them. The other thing you can do is take raw and mix it in with canned food. That might help attract them as well, and slowly work up to more raw and less canned until you get all the way up to raw. Sometimes it's a texture thing. So things about raw that you need to know is some of our raw food has been put through a pasteurization processing called high pressure pasteurization. Say that fast twice. It's called HPP. We do HPP to human foods. Probably the most common you can think of is something like guacamole. It has been through the HPP process where they make the guacamole and then they put it behind a heavy sheet of plastic and apply high pressure water. And that pressure will burst the bacteria molecules and make the product safer. So you get rid of the bacteria which tends to be the biggest myth, but tends to be the biggest concern about feeding raw is the bacteria. So high pressure does kill the bacteria, and it is used as a kill step in many of our raw pet foods. And most of our raw foods do use high pressure pasteurization on their feathered and fowl products to avoid things like salmonella. Now, Answers would be our only product that does not use high pressure pasteurization. They use fermentation instead as one of their steps. I wouldn't call it a kill step because it doesn't really kill anything. Fermentation actually just builds the good bacteria to outweigh the bad bacteria and give good gut bacteria. So if you've ever heard of prebiotics and probiotics, that fermentation just adds to the food, the prebiotics and probiotics. So the high pressure pasteurization, though, can sometimes make the pet a little bit pickier. And so you definitely have to go down the chain and maybe try out a few. One of the nice things about all of our raw food is it is guaranteed. So if you're trying it out and giving it a try for your pet, you can always return the open product if it's not working out for you. If your pet's too picky and they won't eat it, you can always return it to us. And we will refund your full purchase price or switch it out for something else for you to try. But we've had really good luck with all of the raw foods that we sell. They're very, very popular. You may have noticed recently that at the Battleground location, we added a new freezer because we've had such high demand for more and more raw. So we will likely be adding another raw food company in the near future. So if you've got a raw food company that you're really interested in or that you'd like to see us carry, please be sure to comment so that we can check into it availability wise from our distribution channels and also see if it's something that we can bring in. Another thing to cover with you is the gently cooked. So we recently brought in Stella and Chewy's Marie's Kitchen, which is a gently cooked product. It's not raw. So if your pet is adverse to not eating raw, maybe a pickier pet, they might do the gently cooked, and that might be an option for you. Looks a little bit like meatballs with fresh veggies in there, and it comes in the freezer. You can keep it in your refrigerator and feed it that way. It's a great topper for kibble as well. Again, another way to add in fresh whole food in addition to putting on top of a kibble or something like that. So it's a great way to add in if you're a kibble feeder. If you are a kibble feeder, of course, we advocate for bone broth. I will tell you that if you're feeding kibble, you should always add moisture, even if that moisture is only water. I would tell you, though, add more than water. Make that moisture nutritionally have some value for your pet. So the moistures that I would recommend would be something like primal bone broth, or some of the bone broth that we have that's shelf stable, like Stella and Chewy's, or Nulo has a great bone broth. They even have a fish bone broth, which is a little bit more rare, and add that to your pet's kibble. It will make a world of difference in nutrition because moisture helps open up the cell to receive the nutrition. So you definitely want to add that moisture to your pet's diet. Other sources of moisture would be like a kefir from Answers or the raw goat's milk. We have that from Answers, from Boss Dog, from Primal. All of those are wonderful sources of moisture. And then if you're looking for a great probiotic and prebiotic that you can add to your pet's diet, Steve's Chia Freeze is wonderful. It's goat milk yogurt with chia seeds, and it also has coconut flour in it to thicken it. So it's like the consistency of a yogurt. And that's a really great thing to add to your pet's food as well, especially if you're looking for a source of probiotics and prebiotics. So all of these are some wonderful raw products that we carry. We carry Steve's Real Food, Primal, Stella and Chewy's, Answers, and we have a few other smaller lines like Vital Essentials and Nature's Variety Instinct. But like I said, if you have a raw company you'd like to see us carry, we'd be happy to talk to you more about that. We are going to be getting in some more gently cooked diets so that we will be adding to that category as well. let me see if there's anything else to tell you. Raw food doesn't just come in one shape or form. Some things to know is like Answers comes in more of a, they have several different varieties, but like this is their milk jug looking packaging, and this whole thing is like raw meat. So if you open it up, it's going to look just like ground hamburger or something like that. And you would defrost this whole thing and put it in a glass container in your fridge, and it's going to keep for about 7 days in your fridge, and feed your pet from that. You'll need to measure out by weight how much you're feeding them. They also have nibbles and patties that you can use depending upon your comfort level with feeding. But this is probably the best bang for your buck. So if you're looking for something that's economical, this packaging is going to be your best bang for the buck. And this is 4 pounds. They also have a 1 pounder. If you're just testing out the product, that's a good way to go. With Stella and Chewy's, they have patties, and they have small little morsel type raw as well that looks a little bit like kibble. So you can just put a scoop in it, scoop it out into your pet's bowl, and then let it defrost. And it only is probably going to take about 20 to 30 minutes to become room temperature. Primal has the same thing, as does Steve's. They also have more of a patty format, so that if you have a larger dog, it can be a little bit easier to feed. If you're pulling out a patty, my recommendation would be to pull it out the night before or the morning before the dinner shift and put it in the fridge to let it defrost throughout the day or throughout the night. And then pull it out about 15 or 20 minutes before you're going to feed and let it get to room temperature. One of the very important lessons that I've learned is feeding your pet at room temperature. So if they're going to eat a raw product or even a cooked product, you want it to be room temperature. That is the best thing for the pancreas and best thing for digestion. You want all of their food to be at room temperature. So when I go to feed my pets, actually, if my husband's watching this, he's gonna rat me out. So I should be honest that most of the time he feeds them. But when we feed, we pull it out and let it get to room temperature so that they can eat it at the most desirable temperature for their body digestion. So I'll sit here for a few minutes. If anybody has questions, I'm always happy to answer. I have a lot of experience feeding raw. I've fed most of these products, and I'm very comfortable with the level of quality that we have in our store for our raw diets. There used to be a day and age when I say to somebody, would you like to hear about raw? They think that they're going to have to put all the components together to do a raw diet. But the nice thing that we have now are all these diets that are completely balanced nutritionally for your pet. So you don't really have to do all the elbow grease of making sure they have the vitamins and minerals and making sure that everything is nice and balanced for your pet. These companies have already done that for you. Very easy, and just as easy as feeding kibble, in my opinion. So if anybody has questions, let me know. But we really, really want our customers to know the value of adding in fresh whole foods for their pet. Even if you stick with a kibble base, you can build a better bowl for your pet. Free to ask questions. While I'm waiting on any questions, I will update you. If you haven't already seen some of our posts about the DCM release that was last year from the FDA, we have seen that theory debunked about the connection to the heart issues and grain-free diets. And it turns out all of that information was collected with a bias in mind because of the way that they presented to vets to collect data. And they have come back out now and said they think it's actually a very complex issue why dogs develop DCM. And they do not think it is related to diet at all. So for those of you who are feeding grain-free and maybe switch to grain-inclusive and have seen issues, you know that it is safe to go back to a grain-free diet. The study that was recently released in June was a study that reviewed and studied over 150 studies. So that's a pretty comprehensive study, and it has been peer-reviewed. So it really has been debunked at this point. We felt confident that it would, but we just had to wait for science to rise up. Let's see, Morgan Murphy, how do raw diets help Cushing's? Is it okay to feed 100% raw? Morgan, I'll tell you a little story, and hopefully my adopter Stacy is watching. I rescued a dachshund about 2 years ago, and her name was Grace. And when I got Grace in, she was fat and tested positive for Cushing's and had abnormal levels for Cushing's. And we put her on 100% raw. She actually went on to Answers because she was at my house. And I put her on a natural Cushing's supplement. And the combination of those two brought her down to normal levels. 2 years later, still not being treated for Cushing's, and she's within normal levels for her Cushing's. So I will tell you that it helps a lot. And it has made such a difference in Grace's life. She's lost all the weight that she had, the excess weight, and is doing great now 2 years later and not on any Cushing's medicine. Now, I can't say that's going to be the case for every Cushing's dog, but I will tell you it can do nothing but improve their health. There was just a recent study released about fatty lipomas and how raw food, not a study, an article, I should say, about how raw diets help fatty lipomas. And I saw the same thing with Grace as well. She had several large fatty lipomas. And if you don't know what a lipoma is, it's a collection of fat cells that kind of have toxins bound to them. That's the best description I can give, that form pockets in your pet's body because they bound to fat cells and aren't able to be, so the body doesn't know what to do with them. So they put them in these little pouches that are soft and squishy, but you may have seen them. They look like lumps, and they're squishy, and you take your pet to the vet and they'll pull a little bit of fluid out and just check that fluid to make sure it is a fatty lipoma and not something malignant. And I have seen great success at lessening the amount of fatty lipomas and shrinking them by using a raw diet. So that's another thing we have noticed really, really helps. And Grace had a lipoma that was probably the size of a racquetball. It was a pretty large lipoma, and it's completely gone now 2 years later, just by going on that raw diet. It made a huge difference. So we see a lot of raw-fed pets here at our store, and I'm going to tell you, we rarely, if ever, hear of somebody having issues with their pet's health on a raw diet. I know my pets have a very consistent health, and I even have an 18-year-old that is 100% raw-fed. And that was a question somebody recently asked me, was if you can transition a senior pet to a raw diet. And my response is not yes, but a resounding absolutely do it. It made a huge difference in Domino, and at 18 years of age, she acts like she's a 2-year-old dog. So we have seen a big difference in her health as well. So you can do it at any age. If I had a puppy right now, I would feed my puppy raw as well. So I don't think that there's any age bracket that I would not be feeding a raw diet. So if anybody else has questions, there's some questions so far. I think I've answered everything. But we're always happy to talk with you here about our experiences with raw diets. I will tell you that a lot of my staff feed a raw diet and have had great success stories that they'd be happy to share with you. And even if they don't feed a completely raw diet, they have experience with adding in supplemented fresh whole foods to the diet to build a better bowl. So they can talk with you more about that. And if you were not lucky enough to get our Bonafactor box or our Generosity box last month, we did the Build a Better Bowl box, and we have lots of different things in there that you could use to build a better bowl for your pet. We do still have those booklets available, so if you want one of those booklets, just shoot me a message here through Facebook, and I'll be happy to provide you with one so that you can read up the instructions on how to build a better bowl and see some of the example products that we included in that box. So that's all I have for today. If you haven't gotten your Zen box yet, be sure to do it. We have sold a lot of them, but we do have a few left. And once they're gone for the month because they are a very expensive box this month. So we only had a limited quantity available, but it's over $100 worth of calming products available for $29.99 for you to try out the different calming products that we carry. So hop on our website, purchase a subscription box, and we'll be happy to deliver it to you or put it here for curbside pickup. But we hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. And if you have questions and you've gotten to the end of this and you still have a question, feel free to post it in this thread and we'll be happy to answer it for you. We'll keep an eye on it. You guys have an awesome weekend and we will see you next week.